back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Today is Tuesday, August 4th, 2015. Joining me as always, the Prince of Twitter at AH Malcolm, Andrew Malcolm of Investors Business Daily, investors.com/Andrew Malcolm, a prince of a guy. at our regular Tuesdays with Andrew. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. That may be one reason why I like Tuesdays so much is that you build up my ego here with this introduction. So everybody should leave now because it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, this is it. This is peak TEMS right here. And
in fact, this is peak pithy.
Peak pith. Say
That's
that.
Right.
Say that 5 times fast. Peak pith. Peak. No. You don't even want to go there.
It's a little dangerous.
That would be very dangerous. We won't do that. Andrew, of course, is my go-to guy whenever I'm talking about journalism, when I'm talking about the media. Andrew is my go-to guy because he's got a couple of years in the business.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you saw this, and I'm kind of springing this one on Andrew a little bit, but since he is the guy who knows everything, I'm sure I won't stump him.
Yeah, that's that go.
How long has undercover infiltration strategies been used by broadcast, especially broadcast media outlets?
Yeah, they've done.
I mean, I think it goes back to the 1970s, right? I mean, I remember seeing this stuff when I was.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's about it. I know I remember little local exposés about car repair shops and that kind of thing that had allegedly hidden cameras, and then they were always those ambush interviews where they catch some poor schlump coming home from work and they chase him up to his door.
Actually, we saw a pretty good example of that with the Rachel Dolezal thing, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right.
When the guy just sprung at the end, so is your father white? And she's like, what? What?
Well, and the thing is, in interviewing techniques, of course, the first goal is to empathize, is to establish some kind of a connection with your subject. So You don't ask the worst questions first. And you may ask questions that you don't that you don't care that much about, just to establish a rapport. And if you're talking with them and you notice their kid's picture on the desk and they're playing soccer, you say, "Oh, my kid plays soccer too." You're just trying to establish some kind of a connection, as you would at a cocktail party or anywhere else, to facilitate communication. The difference, of course, is that you're actually seeking information. The overwhelming majority of times that I did interviews, I wasn't seeking things that I thought they didn't want to tell me. There were times where, and you can tell from whether it's your kid's eyes or a coworker's eyes, you can tell when somebody is lying or fibbing or trying to dodge the question, and you can come back at it. I often, as a reporting tool, would ask people questions that I knew the answer to, and then you would hear them tell you what you knew, or try to string you along on something that they didn't think you knew, but you did, as a gauge of their honesty and so on. And then at the end, you might say, well, there are a couple of questions that are a little bit awkward or a little bit or whatever, and then you would ask them the hard questions about whatever the expose subject is.
Right.
The New York Times that I worked for frowned on pretending you're somebody else. I never pretended I was somebody else. I was sometimes late in announcing that I was a reporter.
Late. You just delayed it a bit, then, is what you're saying.
Delayed it a little bit, just so I could see whatever was going on. There was one time, actually, I really had to fight my emotions. It was during the mid '80s when the farm financial crisis was erupting. Actually, I did a book called Final Harvest about it. One of these cases. There was another one where a farmer went in, shot a couple of bankers, then he went out and killed himself. And I got there, I want to say 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. It's the middle of the winter. It's snowing in this little Iowa town. People, you don't go knocking on doors after 7:30 or 8.
Right.
In that environment, you're not going to get anything anyway. So I was standing around downtown. There was a bar, and that was about the only thing that was open right across from the bank. So I was just kind of standing around on the street all by myself as the snow was falling, and two guys came out. I don't know if they were coming out for a cigarette or what, but the two guys came out, and they saw me, and one of them comes over to me, and it was kind of like feeling each other out, where I wasn't being exactly forthcoming, and it was intriguing to them. And one of them said, well, you're not from around here, are you? And I said, nope, I'm not.
So you weren't any more forthcoming than that, at least not initially.
No, just like they were.
Yeah.
It's
a dance.
If I'd come on and whipped out my notebook and said, no, actually I'm a reporter from Chicago from the New York Times and I'm on deadline. Please, God, help me get the information I need. Then they would have run away. So I was just kind of standing there, and a minute later he says, so where are you from? And of course they suspected it had something to do with the big news. Otherwise, no one would come to that town that didn't live there. And I said, well, Chicago. Yeah.
Chicago.
No, Chicago. That's a long way. And I said, yeah, I just drove in.
Oh.
And then he says, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a reporter from the New York Times. And he said, no, boop. And
Andrew,
said,
by the way, supplies all of our
sound
bleeping
effects. Yes,
bleeping sound
right.
effects. That's right. Yes.
Yeah. And he said, no, boop. And I said, yeah. And I was there. I mean, I was in my boots and jeans and that, so I didn't look like some kind of a three-piece suit guy. And I said, and you can probably guess, to introduce the subject, why I'm here. And he said, oh yeah, boy, yeah, I saw it. It's all over the news. And I said, yeah. But I don't know. I don't always trust what I see on TV. So I got to find somebody to talk with that can tell me the real story. And the guy looked at me, and he looked at his friend, and he said, wait here a minute. And they went and got in their car, and it was cold, so they turned on the car and the heater, and they were in there for, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. And he rolled the window down, and he said, get in.
Wow.
And I got in the back. I was like, okay. And I got in the back seat, closed the door, and turns out the driver of the car who said get in was the best friend of the farmer.
Wow.
And yeah. And they had figured that I was sympathetic, which I was, in the sense that I wanted to explain what in the world happened. And I won't bore everybody with the details, but he knew exactly what happened that day. He knew about the guy's troubles, his family troubles, his marital troubles, but most of all his financial troubles. And I promised that I wouldn't use his name, and he told me all about it. And the next day I was able to verify what he told me, and I wrote a story that had a lot more in it because I was not aggressive and because I didn't announce right up front.
Right.
That I was a reporter, because their immediate reaction would have been, oh boy, I'm running away from this. So, it varies. I've never really been involved with the coming in and playing a married couple who, wanted to get an abortion or something like that.
The reason why I ask, you know why I'm asking, obviously, because you made mention of that. There's actually 2 court cases over the last couple of days that really impact this. And the one is the San Francisco federal judge that placed a temporary restraining order on videos from the Center for Medical Progress. Now, that TRO is a little misunderstood on the right. It was not broadly against all the videos, only those videos that had National Abortion Federation officials in it, and apparently at a meeting of the NAF. That's the only one it applies to, because the NAF was the only one who actually applied for a restraining order on. It doesn't apply to Planned Parenthood. So the videos that don't have any NAF footage will still come out, and one came out today. But the court in San Francisco, the federal court, Judge William Orrick, who, by the way, was a big Obama contributor, as it turns out. I didn't dig that up. Somebody else dug that up. But apparently he was a big Obama contributor, and his wife has been an activist for abortion rights, decided that NAF could be held up to ridicule and threats if these videos came out. Plus, and this is the key part, I think, he was greatly influenced by the fact that the investigators signed a non-disclosure agreement because NAF apparently requires everybody who attends their meetings to sign one of these things. And STEM Express did the exact same thing. I'll come back to that in a second. The other case, though, was up in Idaho. Now, in Idaho, and also in other states like Iowa and Utah, for instance, and I think there's a few more that have this, they have something called an ag-gag law. And an ag-gag law forbids people from publishing material that was video or audio that was taken undercover by deception to expose practices in the agricultural industry. And this is a really interesting law. These laws started popping up a few years ago. The ACLU sued in Idaho in a federal court over this law on behalf of PETA, on behalf of Animal Rights Defense. It's an animal rights group, not the Animal Liberation Front, which is a terrorist group, but a different group. And they won. Federal judge threw out the ag-gag law in Idaho, saying that it was a violation of the First Amendment, and that the proper remedy for bad speech is more speech, which is something that I often say. So it was actually kind of interesting to see this. So
Judge Morrissey speaks.
Judge Morrissey speaks. I'm better looking than Wapner, but probably less obstreperous than Judy. You know, that's.
But you're better looking than Napolitano too.
There you go. I'm better looking than Napolitano, although I know Napolitano would have ruled this way. But what I find interesting about this is that, you know, the media isn't really going in on CMP's side here in San Francisco. Of course, it's just really started, so it's hard to say what's going to happen. There's going to be a hearing.
5 videos. That's
there's 5 videos that came out, but I mean, I'm talking about the fact that there doesn't seem to. I mean, I don't see the ACLU rushing up to San Francisco to defend CMP's undercover journalistic practices, and it's exactly the same type of thing. You have PETA and this animal rights group that were doing, there was another one called Mercy for Animals that were doing these undercover videos in Idaho, got caught and were threatened with, first off, had a prior restraint slapped on their videos, also were threatened with jail time for doing this. And the ACLU, rightly, I think, went up there and fought this case. I got to ask you, Andrew, what are the odds that the ACLU is going to run up to San Francisco? Media outlets that practice this very kind of journalism are going to run up to San Francisco and defend CMP's rights to do undercover journalism to expose industry practices and abuses in the abortion industry. I'm putting the odds of that somewhere between slim and none. And let me tell you something. I think it's getting farther away from slim as we talk.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And to a broader issue, these kinds of reactions by institutions, which I think have a general role in society. I mean, we would argue probably that Judicial Watch is doing something very, very positive, a little bit different, but still positive. But this is part of the corrosion that's going on. I think a lot of it has to do with the atmospherics established and promulgated by the Obama administration, where there can be no good faith opposition to anything they do. Everyone who opposes them is the devil and has malicious intent. But people see these institutions, whether they like ACLU or not, they are accustomed to them riding in on the horse and fighting no matter what the side. I mean, they fought on the side of the Nazis to march in Skokie. the Jewish community outside Chicago. So
Right.
it's the expected, but here they don't. They used to expect the media to be the sort of the watchdog, but here they don't. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
That's okay.
Everybody wants to talk to Andrew because he is just
No,
the oracle.
I'm sorry. They don't. They don't. What the hell is going on here? They don't. They don't. They are not doing the roles that they were expected to do, and Congress, for instance. I think it's. You can argue with what they do and don't do, the Republican majorities in both houses, but Congress is operating better now since the election last November. The Supreme Court goes the way that most people did not expect it to go, and certainly gave the appearance of a couple of judges making political decisions. So there's this uncertainty. You work hard and everything will take care of itself. That's what they used to say on the farm. You work hard for a company, but oh, wait a minute, they're downsizing, so you're out, and you lose your house and maybe the marriage. And there's a lot of this corrosive fear and energy and uncertainty across the country. I think that's one explanation for Donald Trump. He doesn't have any uncertainty. In fact, Seth Meyer, I think it's tonight or last night, Seth Meyer said that Donald Trump is leading in the polls, but sooner or later, Trump is going to do something sane. And the reality is that a lot of people are angry and frustrated, and they don't care that Donald Trump is unpredictable and untrustworthy and is going down the same path as Barack Obama did when he promised everything you want to hear. This is disturbing. It's disturbing for the particular case, but it's also disturbing, I think, for the larger picture.
Well, it is. I'm just curious because you see a lot of this of the media coverage of this emphasizing the fact that these are, and I'm going to use scare quotes over here, Andrew, heavily edited videos. And the standard practice in these, I mean, when you see these things airing on your local television, I'm talking about the undercover videos now, or even interviews, right? They do an interview with, and I can tell you that this has happened to me. They'll do an interview and they'll talk to you for 30 minutes and they'll use 2 sentences out of that interview.
Absolutely.
Anything that's not live is heavily edited.
As an aside, the length of the soundbite is shortening by the year. It used to be almost a minute, and now it's down to 7 or 8 seconds.
Right. So I mean, the idea
because of Bill Nye, the science guy. Did you ever watch those shows? Boom, 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 and we're trained to have the shortest possible attention span.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a whole other.
I mean, it's I'm kidding about blaming him for it, but he's playing right to the social lack of attention span.
Right, but I mean, it's hypocritical to hang your hat on the fact that it's hypocritical in a couple of ways, and the most obvious way is the fact that they, with one exception, I think they have released the full video on the same day that they release the quote heavily edited video, so that people can see, they can sit through a 2 3/4 hour luncheon if they want to see where those things were that first video where those clips were derived. So, in one sense, it's dishonest because you can see the whole video and nothing really changes from what it is that they're presenting. But in the second place, these are the same news organizations that will clip things down into easy sound bites, to easily digestible sound bites, and then present this as this is the essence of the truth. This is what we saw. They can take a hour-long interview and boil it down to 2.5 minutes, and there's nothing illegitimate about that. But that is what they do. That's what these news broadcasters do.
And that's why politicians are trained by their communication strategists to get the key word in
to be punchy.
Yeah, but punchy, of course, but to get the keyword in several times, because don't count on the media falling for the obvious bid for a soundbite, and you could see that last night with Ted Cruz, what was it, the Washington cartel? I think
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah.
yeah, that's the word that he wanted to get out, and he must have said it 7 or 8 times just in the few times that I saw it. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. It is hypocritical, but once again, the media doesn't operate in an ethical way, and who's going to stop them?
Yeah.
I mean, you remember NBC. Social media has a chance of catching them, which I think is what they did when NBC edited the Zimmerman.
Yes.
There was a Zimmerman shooting tape that they edited.
It was the 911 call.
And the 911 call.
They edited out the question that was asked and only provided the answer that Zimmerman offered, which referred to the person's race, without mentioning the fact that the reason why he was providing that information was because he'd been directly asked the question by the and somebody got fired over that when that got exposed. I remember.
Oh, of course, but you don't know how many times that happens and nobody gets fired. And in fact, they get away with it. And we're back to my almost weekly pitch that people have to have a variety of sources that they trust, so that if one of them leaves out the fact that all the videos are there, they're going to come upon the fact that from Ed, that all the video, the entire video is available here. And then they're going to judge the first site. Now, the first site isn't going to know about it. NBC or CBS or whomever leaves something out conveniently. And if you ask them, it'd be for space and time constraints. But it's selective. And this corrodes, once again, the faith that people have. So you can't sit and it's too easy to say, oh, the media, they're just so biased. And say, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? And my suggestion is that you develop your own routine, places that you trust and check. And even in that case, you'll find some that provide more information than others, and they overlap. Some will have A through B, and the next one will have G, H, and R, and someone in the middle will have D, E, and F, and you can triangulate and get the real story. But that takes some work. I remember, was it a comedy sketch or in a movie where somebody said, "Oh well, yeah, but geez, you'd have to think about that a lot," and the person said, "Yeah." Yeah, you'd have to think about it. Mm-hmm.
There's actually another really great scene that came to mind. You've seen the movie The Insider, right?
Probably. I don't
with
remember.
Al Pacino and Christopher Plummer. It's the story about the interview that they did with that CBS's 60 Minutes did with Jeffrey Wigand that was then suppressed. So there's this great scene where Mike Wallace was being interviewed by CBS Evening News, and he was going to kind of blast CBS executives for squelching the video of Wigand, and he's watching the CBS Evening News in the newsroom, and the CBS News president is there. The guy playing the CBS News president is there, and the person asks them, will there be information tonight that CBS viewers need to know that they will not see tonight in tonight's broadcast? And Christopher Plummer as Mike Wallace goes, yes. And then that's it. It cuts away. And he stands up. He says, "Where's the rest? Where's the rest?" And it's Jeffrey Tobolowsky who plays the news president. He says, "Well, time constraints." And Christopher Plummer as Mike Wallace turns around and says, "Who told you that your incompetent fingers had the requisite skill to edit me?" I love that scene.
Incompetent fingers.
You're
Just as an aside of kind of a humorous story, back in the 80s, I did a couple of books on Canada. One was called The Canadians, and a Canadian TV network bought the rights, and we were making a mini series out of it. And one of the points of it is how the cultures have intermingled. So we had an interview set up in the plaza or not the plaza, the Pier, I guess, across the street there, in New York. And we had Peter Jennings, Morley Safer, and somebody else, all of whom were very prominent media types in the U.S. and Canadian. And they had a camera on each of them and then one on me, and they were putting it together. Well, at one point, this will tell you how long ago it was. At one point, I said to Peter Jennings, who you may know, he's like Scott Walker. He never graduated from college.
Right.
And at one point, I said, with a half a smile, noting the difference of the two countries, I said to Peter Jennings, can you imagine a day where a Canadian network would hire an American to give them their own news and pay them $1 million a year? And there was dead silence. And of course, Jennings, who's used to acting on television, he paused and he looked right over at the camera and he said, "Who let him in here? Get him out of here. Get him and edit this out." which of course required them to use it.
Right.
Which of course he did. Rest his soul. He was a wonderful man, a very kind and friendly person. But he played right into the, I don't want to talk about that because it would never ever happen. But
That's
yeah,
funny.
those are the kinds of things that happen on camera.
All right, so I want to before we wrap things up here, I do want to get to your story today, because I find this to be very amusing. There's very much a change of pace here. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, DNC chair extraordinaire, was asked a question on Hardball, and this was last week. I believe it was either Thursday night or Friday. I believe it was Thursday night with Chris Matthews. Chris Matthews is talking about Bernie Sanders. Will Bernie Sanders be on stage at the Democratic National Convention? Because Matthews is kind of worried about this because Bernie Sanders is an avowed socialist, and Democrats had spent decades trying to separate themselves from the avowed socialists. And he's asking Wasserman Schultz, "Hey, look, what happens? What are you going to do with Bernie Sanders? You're going to give him a primetime speaking slot at the DNC?" And she's like, "Bernie's great. He's caucused with the, so yeah." And he's going, "Well, what's the difference between a Democrat and a socialist?" And she won't answer it. And he asks it a couple of times, and he says, "Well, I used to think there was a big difference."
I could tell you a difference, he said.
Yeah, well, or you used to be able to tell a difference between the Democrats and the socialists, but
apparently he made a good point, to his credit. And I was taken by that. And then she had another gaffe. She's had a number of gaffes, and as I understand it, kind of the White House has fallen out of love with her. She was very convenient, and as usual in those positions, the White House or the powers that be use you for however long they can use you. Now, I don't know that they get anybody to come in for the last few months of an administration, so they may stick with her. But her gaffes and her obvious lack of connection with political clout with the White House has it made her a B-list guest. And she was on with Chuck Todd too on Sunday, and he asked her the same question, and she did the same dodge. You would think someone in that position, which of course speaks to her preparation, would be prepared for such a thing. It's kind of an obvious question, if you think about communication strategy.
You think? I mean, they've got a socialist running in the primary and doing well, by the way, doing probably much better. It's sort of like the Donald Trump thing, right?
Yeah,
doing
exactly. Bernie Sanders is the Democrats' Donald Trump this time, speaking to the anger, in their case, on the left. It's an inchoate anger, and I think it's okay to sort of vent it now, but to be making decisions about whom you're going to support or not support on the basis of that. And I'm thinking that when we find out tonight the 10 people who get on the Fox debate Thursday, I'm thinking that it may be a good thing if you're in the second group, because you won't have to contend with Bush. It'll be a little tricky. I mean, with
Trump.
Trump, yeah. It'll be a little tricky for those in the top 10 or the other 9 because you don't want to, well, in Ted Cruz's case, he doesn't want to alienate Trump to the point of losing Trump's supporters when Trump inevitably drops out, or others that don't want to give Trump all the time. They want to talk about what they're doing. And I was so intrigued by this, and this is a little promo if you don't mind, but so tomorrow morning and Thursday morning, I'll be publishing 2 separate columns where I've interviewed media luminaries and political scientists and important commentators like yourself to ask them how they watch debates and what they look for in these debates. Actually, I learned quite a bit. Chuck Todd had a couple of really interesting ways of doing it. One of them, and I won't spoil it, but one of them is that after a debate, that you watch it with the sound off, and you can see the body language of the candidates and who likes who and who really doesn't. And then watch afterwards when they're doing the credits. And I bet you won't see. Usually, it's, hey, good job, and they're all shaking hands and all that. But I wager you won't see the top candidates doing much of it. Trump may try it, and he may want to try to get a picture of Jeb Bush refusing to shake hands or something like that. But you won't see hugs and smiles and buddy with between them because, or among them, because that'll be lifted out and used in some kind of an election ad next year.
Yeah,
by somebody. So
yeah, they're going to be.
But anyway, I hope
Trump.
people will take a look at this and maybe learn something from it.
By the way, I'm going to be at Red State Gathering this week.
So I want to hear about that. I'm not going this year.
I'll be in the mix with, I think most, if not all, of the announced significant Republican contenders will be there, including Donald Trump. I believe most of the rest of them are going to be there, including Jeb Bush, by the way. Hoping to get some one-on-ones while I'm out there. I've got a couple of things percolating along those lines already. We'll work on a few other things as they pop up. But we're going to have a great time. It's a great event. It's actually my first time going out there. And
really?
Yeah. I didn't go prior to, I was supposed to go last year, which was the first year that Salem owned Red State. But I was guest hosting for Hugh Hewitt and I couldn't do both things. So I stayed in LA and Red State Gathering went on without me, and I'm sure nobody really missed me anyway. But this year I'm going, and it should be a lot of fun. I will actually be one of the official photographers, well, one of the semi-official photographers of the event. So I'm hoping to post a lot of really interesting pictures, as well as doing interviews and jotting down some notes and gathering my thoughts. I'll be doing the debate recap on Thursday evening. So so I'll get a chance. We're going to have a debate party there. We'll sit through the debate with a big audience. I know on Saturday we're going to the College Football Hall of Fame in Atlanta, and Donald Trump is going to be the speaker at that event. So that will be interesting.
Yeah, he likes the one-on-one. He dodged the one last night. He likes to be the focus of attention. I understand why, but
yeah,
it's not really a way for the public to see him challenged.
Well, he was on Hugh Hewitt last night. It was more of a lighter interview, but Hugh and he had a good time. But it was an interesting interview. I make sure that people check that out. All right. Well, speaking of checking out, we won't have a show on Thursday, by the way, because I'll be at Red State Gathering. But we are just about wrapping things up here with Andrew, but we have to get to the jokes of the week. Plus, I want to find out what else Andrew's got going on the rest of this week.
Well, okay, we have Conan O'Brien, who said that another American is in trouble for hunting a lion. First, it was a dentist. Now it was a doctor being accused of illegal lion hunting in Zimbabwe. Here's my question. Whatever happened to golf?
It's almost as expensive, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Conan also said the fast food chain In-N-Out is being sued for allegedly putting meth in someone's milkshake. On the
What?
bright side, employee productivity is up 800%.
Oh, there you go.
and then he said, finally, he said, Donald Trump has fired a campaign advisor for posting racist remarks on Facebook. Isn't that shocking? Donald Trump has a campaign advisor.
Yeah. By the way, same guy he fired in 2012 when that whole McKay Coppins thing kind of blew up in their face.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, he was the guy who arranged that. And after McKay wrote a less than flattering profile of Donald Trump, Nunberg got fired at that point in time too. And yeah, it was. You got to read McKay Coppins on it because it's really interesting. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't have my rim shot up, or I would have done it.
Oh well. So that's the
yeah. Ed can live without somebody else's sound.
I got a whole thing of sound effects over here. I almost never use them now because I don't want to step on anybody else's stuff. But I could have used the rim shot.
And remember, don't be late.
Don't be late. So what else do you got coming up this week, Andrew?
Well, mainly I'm focused on the debate. I'll have to write something about it. I share a little story in one of these columns about the first time I saw a debate, which was the actual first presidential debate, September 26, 1960, Nixon-Kennedy. And this may be a sad commentary, but I was a politics junkie even at that young age. And having grown up in the 40s, as a kid in the 40s with radio before television, so I was in a noisy prep school rec room. So I didn't watch the debate, but I took over the TV there. But I stood next to it and listened to the debate. And so I came out thinking that Nixon had won, which I was not alone in that, those who listened to it on the radio. And that was my important lesson, that you don't listen to TV debates, you watch TV them, debates. Yeah. And there's another wonderful little story involving Peter Jennings, who moderated a presidential debate, I don't remember when, but some years ago, before he passed. And he moderated the debate, so he's sitting there just a few feet from the candidates, asking all the questions in that format. And then when the debate was over, everybody thanked, they shook hands, and Peter came back and sat in his chair and turned around and talked to the ABC correspondents. And one of them said, well, what did you think of the debate? Who won? And he shrugged. He said, I don't know. I have to go watch it to see it, to see who won. And that, I think, he put his finger on a that could be disturbing, but an interesting reality. Anybody in your audience who has gone to a college or a pro football game and watched it in person, and then goes home and watches a replay and hears it, those are different games.
They are.
And that's the same with debate. So people have to watch it Thursday night with that in mind, that there's two realities. Because of the way humans' minds are constructed, they will see the one that favors their guy and is least favorable to the other. But there's another reality in that room, and I've been in those rooms, and they're much different than what you see on TV. So
I agree.
I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that you got to factor it into your decision-making process. But this is the first one. Last night basically was the first one. But so some of them will be a little nervous. There'll be some gaffes and probably, but it's a long process.
And, it is indeed. And it starts
I
tomorrow.
think Hugh is the one in September, I think.
That's correct.
At Reagan, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And that's the one I'm really looking forward to, because that will have every single one of them involved in the questioning, including the ones that I'm really interested in, Carly Fiorina and others, to see how they behave. So Anyway, sorry I went over.
Nope, that's good. I'm glad that we got that. We got
Yeah,
that
have a
in.
good trip down there to Atlanta.
Yeah.
We'll have to share a full report next week.
Next Tuesday, we'll be back next Tuesday, and we'll do a full report on my experiences there at Red State Gathering, and of course, keep an eye out at investors.com/Andrew Malcolm for Andrew's thoughts on the debates as it's going along, and on Twitter, where he is the Prince of Twitter at Malcolm. If you're not following him already, you're a moron. And I know that nobody out there is a moron, so you're all following him. So I don't even know why I'm bothering promoting it. But he is the Prince of Twitter. So, Andrew.
You break me up, Morrissey. Thank you.
Thanks again, Andrew. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next Tuesday, sir.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Andrew Malcolm has been my co-pilot there for the first segment of the Ed Morrissey Show. Right now, we're going to go ahead and call Linda LeFauve. Linda is a, let's go ahead and see how we can call. There we go. Skype just drives you up a wall. So Linda LeFauve is Associate Vice President at Davidson College, but also wrote a powerful analysis of a study that has been at the center of the so-called rape culture hypothesis. And Linda LeFauve did an absolutely fantastic...
This is Linda LeFauve.
Linda, hi. This is Ed Morrissey from hotair.com. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing good. And we're live on the air right now. And
Okay.
Thank you for joining us. And you're an associate vice president at Davidson College. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great. And are you a regular contributor to Reason Magazine?
No, that was the first article that I had in Reason.
Well, it's a great magazine. I'm a big fan of Reason. Reason.com, Reason TV. They're great folks over there. And it was an excellent article. I was just introducing it as I was dialing you up. And what brought you to take a closer look at this particular study from the University of Massachusetts, Boston?
Some of the numbers around the discussion on campus sexual assault or campus rape didn't sound logical to me as a statistician. So I started to read more about the various studies' methodologies. How were they defining their terms? How were they collecting their data? The one about 90% of campus assaults being committed by serial rapists who average 6 rapes apiece really didn't ring true to me at all, and that's why I started to look very closely at LeFauve's 2002 paper.
And this 2002 paper, I'm just going to go ahead and pull this up on my screen here while we're talking, was by, David LeFauve, who is a professor at University of Massachusetts, Boston. This paper was written in 2002. And am I correct in characterizing this paper as sort of the central thesis for the theory of rape culture on American campuses?
It's the one that's far and away the most often cited and quoted and appears most often when people are discussing how certain policies have come about. So yes, I think that's a fair characterization.
You know what struck me about this? First off, just excellent work, Linda, in taking it sort of dissecting this study. But I mean, this is 2002. It's an academic study about academia, really. I mean, it's a study about the environment on college campuses. We're 13 years out from the publication of this study. As far as I can tell, you seem to be the first person to actually take a close look at LeFauve's methodology, at his assumptions, at the acquisition of his sample. Why has this never been challenged before? I mean, in academic environment, you should be expecting some give and take in these things. These are supposed to be peer reviewed. I'm at a loss as to how this stood for 13 years.
It's a very good question, actually. I think the first few years after it came out, it didn't generate a lot of attention because it wasn't actually about campus sexual assault. The campus was a convenient place to get people to fill out the surveys that Dr. LeFauve's doctoral students had used when they were doing their dissertations, which is where the data actually came from. It's a very small subset of several dissertation data collections. And it was a very small sample, so it didn't really break any ground in terms of what it was saying. People know that incarcerated rapists, stranger rapists, tend to perpetrate multiple acts. So a question about whether these supposed undetected rapists may have done the same was an interesting question, but there really wasn't enough about this study that answered that. So it just didn't generate that much attention. Then, and this is where it becomes a little bit cloudy, sometime around 2010, it came back up again, apparently in connection with a report NPR was doing on a case at Wisconsin where David Lisak was quoted as an expert on campus sexual assault.
So it was
and it
8
went
years
from
out.
there.
It was 8 years out, and all of a sudden he emerges at that point in time. Still 5 years ago, or I would assume close to 5 years ago. I don't know when in 2010 this occurred, but closer than not to 5 years ago. And again, I mean, I understand the power of the word study, right? A study says, well, we get this all the time in the media. This study says this. We get this every 2 months or so. We get conflicting studies about coffee, for instance. Coffee's really good for you. No, coffee's really bad for you. No, coffee's really good for you. A study says, do people just take these studies at face value too easily? They don't look into this, or is it something more in this particular case that this served a particular political / ideological desire, and so nobody was really all that interested in taking a closer look at it?
I think there are two things going on. One is that, yes, we do tend to take experts or supposed experts' word on various issues, and I understand that from a practical perspective. We don't really have the time, and we often don't have the background to go in and dissect every study that comes out. So we would hope that whoever reports it initially, if something comes up at a later date that contradicts it, that they would be as vigilant in reporting the contradiction as the original information, which has not been the case here. The other thing is that rape or any kind of sexual assault on campus, it's very difficult to track down the how and why. It's part of a cultural thing with drinking and young people and bad judgment, all sorts of things that are very hard to get a handle on, worth getting a handle on, but very hard to. So when campuses became very pressured by the federal government to do something about the quote-unquote rape epidemic, this study provided them with an anchor, something where they could point to, here's what the problem is, and so now we can think of concrete actions to take in the face of this very difficult problem. Otherwise, I think it's the anchor effect of this particular study is why it's taken such hold.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that, by the way, and all of those aspects. At the same time, though, media outlets had, and the government, I mean, we can get into what the motivations of the government were, perhaps, if you want to go there, but I think we can kind of make some assumptions about the general ideological drift there. But even apart from that, the government's own data on this particular topic directly contradicts all of these claims. I mean, and I'm not talking about necessarily Justin Lisak's study here, but the general idea that there is an epidemic of sexual assault on college campuses. The FBI, the Department of Justice, is usually considered to be sort of the gold standard for crime reporting. They do probably the most diligent data collection. The methodology and the data are publicly available. It's pretty easy to research this stuff. Their own data there shows that the rate of sexual assault on college campuses is 6.1 per thousand, so 0.61%, presumably annually. Whereas in the general population, it's 7.2 per 1,000, 0.72%, slightly higher actually off campus than it is on. And you can, it's it's probably close enough to where you can't really say, well, there's a great deal of difference between the two, but that's sort of the point. And even if you're looking at that and saying, well, look, only 1 in every 5 sexual assault is actually reported, it actually comes to the attention of law enforcement, or even 1 in 10, that's still an order of magnitude off from 20%, which is the number that gets tossed around a lot. And it's surprising to me that with that data available, I mean, the actual hard data available on this, that nobody for 5 years, from an academic perspective, took a look at the assumptions built into that source study until you came along and did it for Reason Magazine.
A couple things I think happened there as well. The Bureau of Justice statistics are not always presented in the friendliest way, and people don't necessarily know where to go get them.
Yeah.
But a lot of the research that resulted in that, the claims of 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 college women, would appear in more mainstream articles and written in friendly ways. And even there, where I think people might have had an initial reaction that, wow, that seems really high, they were repeated so often that they became familiar, and people just started to accept them. The statistics that you're quoting don't appear as often, and so people don't think about them. They go to what they know, which is the one that keeps appearing. The same sorts of data that you just described also shows that incidents are going down in the 18 to 24-year-old age group, which is where most of these incidents take place, both for college students and for non-college students. Now, I want to be really careful here that I'm not saying that means there's not a problem.
Right.
But to call it an epidemic or a crisis, which is how it's often labeled, to me suggests an increase in frequency, and that's not what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, and this is a sort of, I don't know what you want to call it. I won't characterize it, but this is the same sort of thing that we all have to say when we're discussing how badly this topic has been mangled in the media, in the culture. We have to start off by saying, look, every rape is a crime. It's a horrible, horrible crime and should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And hopefully it is. But these things matter because it talks about where our priorities are. And in this particular case, and this is a reason why I think Reason is the perfect place for your analysis to have been published. In this particular place, this bad data, this study that is just academically indefensible, is being used to demand shortcuts through due process because of the fact that this is an epidemic, it's a crisis, we have to act, and that's the root of a moral panic right there. That is the structure of a moral panic. And we've seen it before. This is not a new thing. We saw it in the 1980s with the McMartin preschool thing, where you had the recovered memory thing, and people were going back and accusing people of this extremely bizarre sexual abuse structures that turns out were mostly the imaginations of the psychologists that were implanting these memories, and I'm using scare quotes here, Linda, into people's heads. And when you have these things, there's only one purpose to these things, and that's to get the government to act in a way that they're not acting right now. And I mean, that's the scary part, and that's why it was such an irresponsible development. This study was irresponsible, and the cottage industry that grew up around it is so irresponsible and so dangerous.
And I think there are parallels between the McMartin daycare case and the other ones that were similar at that time. And this one, again, there was a reliance on experts. Experts said children do not lie about this kind of a topic. And no one's going to say that children lied. They were fed information, and children have imaginations, and they went with it. So even the data, which would be the children's report, was manipulated in the face of information that contradicted what was happening, that people should have been skeptical about. People were not skeptical and moved forward when a reasonable person might have stopped. But then you also had the same situation where you can't say a negative thing. Aren't you concerned about protecting children? Aren't you concerned about young people on college campuses? Well, yes, yes to both. But that doesn't mean that you violate the laws of logic or you run roughshod over evidence that contradicts your central premise. If
Right.
you truly are concerned about children and young people, or anything where the data seem to be working against what you're trying to say, if you're truly concerned about that, you want good data and you want actions that are predicated on it.
Linda, what's been the reaction since you published your piece at Reason? I'm certain that you've received feedback. What kind of feedback have you gotten from this?
I've gotten feedback from people who were glad to see that a light was shown on questionable numbers. Not a lot beyond that. I've not seen a movement, even a pause, for people to take a look at programming, at least not that I have been aware of, but it may be that I'm just not part of those conversations.
You know, I've seen your work get promoted. I mean, I wasn't the first person to write about this. In fact, I think it was a day later before I got a chance to write about it. I wrote about it in a column, then we put it up at Hot Air. I've seen some discussion of it. I guess I'm not surprised to see that the discussion has been pretty much limited to the people who are already questioning, who are already skeptical about these claims. And I have seen almost nothing, no reaction, not even criticism coming from people who are promoting. They're pretty much ignoring what you're describing here.
That part has surprised me. I wasn't surprised to hear from people that say, yes, this is something that we were skeptical about as well. I was prepared to hear from people who said, you're wrong and here's why you're wrong. And I've not heard from anyone yet saying, what you've written is incorrect and here's why. So the two reactions seem to be, yes, we agree with what you've written, we believe that too, or it's just being ignored.
That's interesting because, when some of us are raising questions about these, we're being accused of enabling the rape culture or being rape supporters, and not just guys, right? Ash Scow over at the Washington Examiner, who's been doing a great job reporting on the abuses in the Title IX enforcement on college campuses, has been accused of that. Christine Hoff Summers, another one who's been accused of being a rape enabler, for questioning these numbers. I'm actually a little surprised that nobody's gone after you on that case.
And it may be that I'm not a high-profile person, and it's not a good use of their time, or they're just still gearing up, or people just hope that this one will go away. Or what I harbor this hope is that it would be difficult to say it's wrong because it would be hard for people to point to something in what I'd written that's contradicted by evidence elsewhere.
Well, I am going to just make sure that I've got it linked in the show post. If you haven't read Linda LeFauve's takedown of the CZEC study, you should definitely do that. It's lengthy, it's detailed, it's well written, it's engaging, and frankly, it's a little frightening. And so I would make sure this is something, it's a must read. You have to go read this. It's that important. I want to thank again, Linda LeFauve. Thanks for being with us today. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk to you some more. If this thing heats up, hopefully we'll talk to you a little bit more about that too.
I would like that. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Linda LeFauve has been my guest, and now we're going to go ahead and dial up Milo Yiannopoulos. Just as soon as I find, there's Milo. We'll get Milo on Skype here. He's going to be coming to us live from London. And in fact, I think he's on the line now. Milo, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. How are you?
I am doing well. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show here. It must be late in London, though. I mean, it's 10 o'clock there?
Yeah, no, it's not too late. I just came home. We just wrapped up a documentary I'm helping the BBC out with on the men's rights movement and the manosphere. So I just got in the door. I've had my fried chicken, and I am kicking back on the sofa. I'm very happy to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on, and it's great to have you on from Breitbart.com, a great website, and you're doing some fine work on Gamergate. In fact, you're doing most of the fine work on Gamergate in the media. We've covered it a little bit. Our mutual friend, Cranky T-Rex, has done some pieces. I've done some pieces at Hot Air, but the lion's share of the coverage of Gamergate has come from you. And I saw on Twitter, which is where I live half my life these days, that you were challenging not just the mainstream media, but the conservative media to get their asses in gear and start covering this because it's important, especially to conservatives.
Yeah, I've been very frustrated, actually, with the pickup from the conservative media. Now, Andrew Breitbart used to say correctly, I think, that politics was downstream from culture.
Yep.
And it's certainly the case that the media that we consume, the entertainment industry, far more than the news, affects the way that we communicate with other human beings. It helps to shape our attitudes toward things. There's no evidence that, as in the case of Gamergate, video games can make you violent or sexist, but it is certainly true that the stereotypes that the general entertainment media propagates do help to sort of shape people's attitudes to things. Now, the conservative right in America has done an absolutely terrible job of understanding this fundamental truth about the way that people come to understand the world around them. It's made a terrible error in basically relinquishing control, not just of the arts and of entertainment, but of academia too. All of these huge superstructures in society, all these intellectual edifices, have been handed straight over to the left, given to the political left, and one of them is entertainment. Now, probably the biggest entertainment medium, it's the biggest by numbers, it's an $87 billion industry, it's bigger than Hollywood, is video games. And I started reporting on this controversy almost a year ago this month, I think, explaining how there was a culture war coming to video games, and there was a battle brewing for the soul of the video games industry, and this industry that would shape so much of how young people come to understand the world around them, so many of their prejudices that would then have to be sort of carefully unpicked and undone by our side of the fence who understand how the world really works. Was just being sort of handed over to the left because none of the conservative media jumped on it. I mean, I think it's such an important, huge, strategic battleground for the political right. And yet there's some total of journalists that got in touch with me about it, interested in following the story up. I think it was fewer than 10 in the year I've been reporting on it. Absolutely extraordinary dereliction of duty from the right, because they have this silly snobbery where they think that they particularly have a snobbery about video games, but they have a snobbery about culture in particular because they think it's inferior to politics. They think it's secondary to politics when exactly the opposite is true.
Milo, I have to tell you, whenever I used to do movie reviews from time to time, and I just haven't had a chance to do that because I just haven't had time to go to the movies. But I love movies and I love writing reviews. I write about, television. Many of us write about television at hotair.com. And I'm not a gamer. So, I mean, I don't know the gamer culture, but I'm certainly aware of it. When we do try to engage on that, we usually get some sort of this pushback from readership, from other conservatives, is that just giving attention to Hollywood or the entertainment industry is putting money in their pocket, and the best thing to do is ignore them because you want to starve them and make them go away. And to me, that's just insane. I mean, it's not going to go away because it's almost like being a child. It's like, I'm going to cover my eyes and anything I don't see doesn't exist. It just doesn't work that way.
Well, this is a problem with the right in general. They have started to use the tactics of the left. They've started to do what the left does. And the left has a time-honored, well-worn strategy that I like to call la, 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 I'm not listening. And this is precisely what happens with video games and with the entertainment industry. And the right says, right, we can't win there. There's no point. Let's not bother. Let's just pretend that Hollywood's not happening. Meanwhile, hundreds of millions of voters across the Western world are having their political opinions formed by Hollywood studios, by video game publishers, and by traditional book publishers, and of course by newspaper publishers and 24-hour news channels. But primarily, I suppose, at least in the soft senses, by the entertainment media, it is not just stupid, but suicidal for anyone who cares about, the free market, freedom, liberty, small government, any of these values. Anyone who is a classical liberal, for example, who believes in the tenets of J.S. Mill, who thinks that people should be allowed to to do as they like, as long as they're not hurting anybody else or infringing on anyone else's rights or safety or security. Anyone who believes any of those things is being grotesquely and recklessly irresponsible. If they think they can just turn a blind eye to the entertainment industry and fight the battle in Washington instead, by the time it gets to Washington, it has already been lost.
That's a great point, Milo, and I couldn't agree with you more.
I always like to hear that.
Well, come on my show. I'll agree with you an awful lot because I think we're pretty similar in outlook. But
it sounds that way.
The abortion fight, I think, in the United States really is a good model for what you're talking about, and you're seeing this right now with the Center for Medical Progress, Planned Parenthood videos, and that sort of thing. I mean, we're demanding that the federal government stop subsidizing Planned Parenthood, and that's a fight worth having. But what the real fight here is, and I think some of us in politics are missing this point, isn't just to defund Planned Parenthood. I mean, that's a fight that, again, it's worth having, but that's kind of small potatoes. That's a Washington fight. What the fight is to convince Americans that abortion is killing people. That's what abortion is. It's what abortion does. It kills human beings. And these videos demonstrate that in stark, undeniable terms. And this is David Daleiden at Center for Medical Progress is changing the culture. This is he's not making a political argument here. He's making a cultural argument. He is saying that Planned Parenthood has been lying to you. The liberals have been lying to you about how they see abortion. They're saying it's just a clump of cells. They say it's no more moral consequence than removing a tumor. But when you're not watching, they're selling these things because they're valuable as human organs. They're selling the organs. They recognize that this is a human being that they have destroyed in their clinics, and they're making money off of the destruction. And that, to me, is the cultural argument. And that's why these videos are so tremendously powerful. And we tend to get lost in let's go to Washington and see how that plays out on the Senate floor. Do we have 60 votes to get past cloture? Again, not an unimportant discussion, but it's not the primary discussion here.
No, I think that's true. And in a way, the Planned Parenthood story is even better than the entertainment industry. I use better in a strict sense. And it's that you don't need to be religious to be utterly horrified by the callousness and apparent sociopathy with which Planned Parenthood doctors and executives talk about body parts of babies. You don't need to be, the stereotypical Bible-thumping, Deep South. I mean, there's very, very often nothing wrong with those sorts of people. They have far better aligned moral compasses than the rest of us. But you don't have to be one of them to appreciate just how appalling the feeling is when you see this Dr. Nucatola scarfing down salad and slurping wine while she talks about the right way to get a baby out so they can harvest the organs. You don't need to be any kind of person to be horrified by that. And it's why Planned Parenthood immediately went on a sort of distractionary offensive, using all of the media strategies at their disposal, all of the political strategies at their disposal. There's a right-wing hate group that hates this, and the videos are dodgily edited, and Planned Parenthood, blah, blah, blah. But they've already lost the argument by that point. And I think it's, as you correctly suggest, I think it's a similar principle in play. In the sort of Gamergate controversy in video games, you've already lost it by the time you get to politics, because it's there are things going on in the culture we need to care about and we need to protect. And similarly with Planned Parenthood, I think there's just a natural, visceral human reaction to seeing a person speak about another life in that way. And it demonstrates the sort of person that you need to employ to keep these organizations ticking over, and the sort of attitude, the sort of contempt that they have for human life. And I don't think it takes, I think it's an advantage if you do have faith, of course I do, but I don't think it takes any to be horrified by that, which is why I think these videos are so, in a way, so clever and so well calculated. And it's so sort of, it's brilliant to sort of drip feed them out as David Daleiden has been doing. I found out, by the way, I sort of recognized the name from somewhere, and I realized I've been emailing him about 10 years ago about something completely unrelated. So I thought, oh, this is great. I know this guy, and I know he's terrific. So I was relatively happy that the source of these videos was sound. I think it's drip feeding them out like this. It does prolong the horror, and in a sense, it is a little manipulative. But I think it's effective, and I think it's righteous, if you like. It's doing the right thing, because I think it's showing people in small doses just how utterly abhorrent the moral attitudes, of the people that run this organization are, and whether or not Planned Parenthood provides other services women unrelated to abortion. I think these are people who quite clearly should not be in receipt of taxpayer money.
So let's talk more about Gamergate in that sense too, because here's the thing I don't get about Gamergate. I've written about it. I've seen other people write about it. Not too many though. And to me, this is a fight that is right up conservatives' alley, right? Because it's about media bias. Most of us got interested in blogging because of media bias. I mean, this is a juicy media bias story. It's got sex. It's got hypocrisy. It's got liberals.
It's got rape threats. It's got evil feminists. It's got it's got basement dwelling nerdy gamers who I realised are actually not the bad guys after all. It's got everything you could possibly want as an exciting countercultural right wing, sort of right wing media narrative. It's everything you could ever want in an anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian, nannying, controlling feminist left. It is the perfect story. You could not invent a better story, a better sort of cultural story for the right wing. The right wing media, but nobody really wanted to touch it, and nobody put any resources into it. Nobody prioritized it. It doesn't surprise me, I suppose, that Breitbart, created by the man who said politics was downstream from culture, would be the one to own the story. And they gave me such wide latitude. I can only thank the bosses, really, because they really just said, go and follow this and see where it leads and just do what you want. And they were incredibly supportive. It was great. But nobody else really, in a sustained way, did any reporting on this, with a few sort of honorable exceptions, sort of opinion pieces and whatever. But nobody was really reporting on it. Nobody treated it as serious news. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that gamers have no social capital. The left hates them because they say that video games make you sexist. The right hates them because they say video games make you violent. Everybody wants to blame video games for something. It's a little bit like everybody wants to blame Marilyn Manson for something. And this may not be a popular thing to say for some of your listeners, but there is, just as in video games, nothing wrong with Marilyn Manson. It is just art and it is just music. There's no evidence that it makes people behave any worse or any better in the real world. This is just, escapist creative freedom that we should at all costs protect. And if you don't like your children listening to records with swear words or with certain morals, that's one thing. But claiming that this stuff makes the world a worse place is quite different. And it is something that the left does all the time, and the right simply has no idea how to counter these arguments. And there's a very simple way to counter them, which is ask to see the evidence, because there never is any.
There's never any evidence.
Ask to see the studies. Ask to see the evidence that video games have been responsible beyond hysterical media reporting. Ask to see the evidence. Another reason the right has failed entirely on video games is that it knows that the right-wing media establishment knows it has itself been culpable in demonizing video games. This is what I mean when I say gamers have no social capital. It's a gigantic $87 billion industry whose customers are some of the most marginalized and ignored as far by reporters and by the mainstream media as it's possible to imagine. But the right-wing media is reluctant to sort of backtrack on games, even though it sees a potentially great victory over the left and an incredibly culturally significant one. It still won't do it because it knows that it too has been responsible for demonizing games for other reasons in other ways in the past. Jack Thompson, for example, who was the precursor to Anita Sarkeesian. And Jack Thompson was a creature of the political right. He was a religious guy who thought that video games made you violent. Anita Sarkeesian is a feminist who believes that they make you sexist. These two people are fundamentally indistinguishable. But it does disappoint me that the libertarian right didn't do more to stick up for creative freedom, for the rights of consumers, and against sort of nannying authoritarian moral panics and sort of leftist arbiters of taste. Because this was a story tailor-made for the right, and they really, really screwed it up on this one.
How did the libertarian media, think about Reason Magazine, for instance. I know that they were doing some coverage of this. How do you think that they did, and do you think that was a signal that, I don't know how Reason did or some of the other mainstream libertarian media did. If they did do a significant job on this, very clearly the conservative media did not pick up the signal, even though some of us are big fans of Reason Magazine.
Yeah, well, I think Reason is possibly one of the honourable mentions that I referred to earlier. Those magazines and publications that have taken this up, what they've tended to do is sort of leave it to one writer because other people can't be bothered to invest in discovering what this is all about and finding out what is this Gamergate thing. It takes a good 3 days worth of reading just to acquaint yourself with the basic facts of this long drawn out controversy. Fine, reasonable, but what the hell are we here for as reporters if not to get to the nub of complex issues and explain them to people? What are we here for if not to translate a complex and sometimes disorientating and mystifyingly convoluted and complicated world down for the general reader and tell people what's going on, what they should think about it? What's our job otherwise? It's another enormous frustration of mine. What I think most of these publications have done, and Reason is one of these, and it was right to do this, and it should be applauded for this, is that it gave Kathy Young, who is a great veteran journalist who writes very sensibly on all sorts of things, who writes for Real Clear Politics, I think, and her things are cross-posted on Reason. It did make space for Kathy to speak about this. Kathy falls into the bracket of highly sensible and commendable feminist female writers who believe wholeheartedly and enthusiastically about the equality of women and all these other things we wouldn't disagree with, but do not like it when feminists start lying about death and rape threats, as happened in Gamergate, and also don't automatically side with women who claim to have been the receipt of threats that can't be substantiated. And Kathy Young, like her friend and my friend and the great feminist scholar Christina Hoff Sommers at the American Enterprise Institute, did take the side of the gamers by and large on this, because they saw not just the sort of nannying, censoring instincts of the left at play, but also the same old figures, the same old bad apples in the left of sort of irresponsible, mendacious feminists lying about more innocent people. So I have to give Reason some credit for making space for Kathy Young. I think they've done a good job, and I like Reason very much. I'm not a libertarian personally, but I have seen a bit more take up from the libertarian media than traditional conservative media. But as I say, I think it's simply because everybody hates games and everybody hates gamers, despite the size of the industry. Yeah. So nobody really wants to sort of sit back and say, oh, God, well, maybe we got this wrong. Maybe these aren't the bad guys after all. Maybe the real bad guys are over there and we should stick up for these guys. Nobody's had the moral fortitude or foresight or just simply been bothered enough to get involved and do it. And I think that's a shame, and I think it's a huge missed opportunity, because I think there was a chance here, and I wonder whether that window has now closed. I don't know if it has or not. I wonder about it, because if you think about all the gigantic sort of edifices of the media, you've got Hollywood, which is now totally owned by by the left. You've got academia, totally owned by the left. You've got the media, the broadcast and print media, which with again a few honourable exceptions, totally owned by the left. And all of these industries and all of these sort of verticals are deeply enmeshed and entwined with the state and with taxpayer subsidies and money and all this kind of stuff. There's this gigantic liberal establishment, all engineered in one direction. There was an opportunity here to nudge the video games industry in a different direction, and to say to video game publishers, look, everybody hates you, but what we will stand up for is your creative freedom. What we will stand up for is your right to have explosions and sexy women, because we understand that these are men's products by men for men, and there is nothing wrong with an attractive woman in a video game. It doesn't make people more sexist in the real world. It just means men sometimes like to look at sexy women. Who cares? We will stand up for your right to do this. And there was a possibility that the video games industry could have been a bright, shining beacon of sort of defiant independence in this otherwise completely sort of social justice warrior and political correctness saturated media landscape. That may still happen, but if it does happen, it will be in spite of the conservative media, not thanks to it, because the conservative media failed to pick up on this when it could have been one of the greatest victories they'd had in decades.
I will say this too. I think it even goes beyond the fact that you could have hammered a blow against the liberal media with this. I think that I think conservatives and libertarians too, for that matter, had an opportunity to reach out to a very large population of younger Americans and educate them on how this fits into the general sort of political aspect of America, which is, here's what we're talking about by liberal bias. This is what we're talking about people who want to come in and impose a nanny state on you. These are the things that we're discussing in the conservative media, and we're going to start talking about your issues, because there are issues as well. Your issues are our issues, and would have given us, I think, a better entree to younger voters to sort of penetrate that liberal cocoon, that the progressive cocoon that comes out of academia, that comes out of the entertainment industry, that comes out of the media. That would have been a penetration point to reach millions of people who are going to be voting for a very long time in this country. and let's face it, we don't have too many of those opportunities, right?
No, I think you're right about that. I mean, I try to, as much as is possible. I mean, obviously, my politics, I wear them fairly openly. I try as much as possible to avoid being an activist about these things. I didn't necessarily see Gamergate as an opportunity to convert, 10 million young Americans to the GOP. But what I certainly did observe is I noticed that perhaps the biggest divide in their generation, maybe not mine, possibly mine, I don't know, maybe the biggest gap in biggest sort of gulf between people in their generation is not necessarily between left and right, but it's between authoritarians and libertarians. It's between people who want to control how others live and people who want to be left alone. Now, that makes sense if you consider cultural, economic, social shifts. It makes sense if you think, we live in a disorientating, globalized world now, with sort of the internet and all of the sort of social changes that brings along, the fact that people move around so much and all the rest of it. It makes sense that, people would want to either regulate how others live or retreat into cocoons where they have their sort of technologically enabled hug space, if you like, at home.
Right.
Now, I agree with you that their enemies are our enemies. Their enemies are our enemies, in the sense that the great threat, I think, to liberty and freedom and to the entertainment industry, which in all the entertainment industries, which I love and I think are so important, the great threat happens to be from the left. It happens to be from the authoritarian end of the left. Most Gamergaters are not going to vote for the Republicans. Most of them think of themselves as reflexively left-wing, and there's nothing to be gained in trying to persuade them otherwise, because they're simply not Republican voters. But I think what would have been really important to be done, I think what would have been valuable, is to say, look, this is an instance in which we can reach across partisan lines where, right-wingers, left-wingers, libertarians alike can all join up to fight what we consider to be a damaging and poisonous influence, which is this, intersectional third wave feminist, haranguing that you see on Vox, on BuzzFeed, on Gawker, on all of these sort of new media liberals. And you see it pop up too, even in places like the New York Times, to resist this impulse and to say, no, this way of interpreting the world based on identity politics and setting people against people, whether it's gender wars or minority wars or whatever, this is destructive. We don't want it. And neither the left nor the right wants this. And to stand up from my point of view, I'm not an American, so I always hesitate to say whether I would be a Republican, because I think it's difficult to say if you don't live in the country.
Sure,
but,
of course, yeah.
But for me, the paramount concern in Gamergate was defending free expression and defending liberty and freedom of thought and to some extent the free market and free enterprise and defending consumer choice. And Gamergate always likes to describe itself as a consumer movement, I think accurately. And so that for me was the important thing. It's sad, it's an indictment on the left that merely standing up for freedom of choice and freedom of speech and freedom of intellectual whatever has become a right-wing thing to do. It's become characteristic of the right, not the left. And that wouldn't have been the case 50 years ago. 50 years ago, you'd had the religious right that everybody said was trying to control everyone and stamp down on things. And, you had sort of moral censors, and Jack Thompson's part of this. But it's an indictment of the left, actually, that the tables have turned. The only significant libertarian movement and the only prominent libertarians in America are on the political right. There doesn't seem to be a classical liberal leftist left. If you can pass that, and that's a sad indictment of the political left. And I think what Gamergate has found is that they sort of felt there was no home for them anymore on the left, because the only people on the left who were interested in video games were interested in censoring them and criticizing their fans and believing, in the face of extraordinary evidence to the contrary, that video games were somehow an awful place for women to be, when in fact, just like the startup industry, it's one of the most welcoming places for women it's possible to imagine.
Milo, what's the status of Gamergate right now? What's going on in the Gamergate scandal?
Well, we're in a sort of period of diminishing returns, I think. I mean, sort of coming up to a year anniversary. What you'll never read and you'll never hear is that Gamergate basically won most of its battles. It got it got universally slandered as a movement of misogynistic threateners and haters and violent misogynists. None of this was true. Not even remotely. It got universally slandered by left and right alike as all sorts of things it wasn't. But what it was really mostly concerned with is a sort of moral panics and cultural policemen and the low standards in journalism that those things create. So in order to believe, for example, that so take Rolling Stone, for example. I'll give you an analogy that all of your listeners will be familiar with. The Rolling Stone story about Jackie at UVA, who claimed to have been gang raped at a fraternity, and of course the story fell apart, just as Emma Solkowitz's mattress girl stories fell apart, just as the Duke Lacrosse case fell apart. To get to a stage where that might happen, where one of the nation's great magazines published a story it probably knew wasn't true, but it published anyway because it thought that narrative said something significant, that it was important that people were thinking about these issues, even if the specific story they told wasn't true. To get to that stage requires requires extraordinary corruption of journalistic principle and morality. Requires a dereliction of journalistic responsibility. That is endemic. It is an epidemic in video games journalism, where games journalists totally sign up to this. Believe anything a woman ever tells you about whether she was threatened or whatever, not realizing that the women who claim to be threatened are often, hard left professional feminist activists who use this stuff as weaponry. They're not really cowering at home, crying and sobbing and scared because somebody said something nasty to them on the internet. They're using it as a weapon to achieve political objectives. Now, in the video games press, this sort of narrative first, fact second approach is pretty much standard, and it remains standard. But Gamergate is winning significant victories. It has, for example, forced a lot of these game sites to disclose whether their writers financially support any of the people they write about. That sounds extraordinary to people like you and me, but it was perfectly standard practice in the video games industry until I and others started reporting on this, for people to write about indie sort of small home, what an indie movie is. There's a big indie gaming movement too.
Right.
To write about these indie games developers and not disclose that the journalist whose byline the story was financially supporting that developer using, a system a little bit like Kickstarter called Patreon, where you send them a bit of sort of monthly wad of cash or something. That was standard practice in games journalism, extraordinarily terrible standards, and some of that is changing. Even the people who hate Gamergate the most, and perhaps particularly the people who hate Gamergate the most, have been sort of forced by their editors and by the executives of their media groups to start putting disclaimers on their journalism to give readers a clearer picture of whether a journalist is personally or financially involved in the subjects of his reporting. This is basic stuff, but it wasn't happening in games journalism until Gamergate. And that, I think that, without boring your listeners too much, there's a variety of things of that nature that Gamergate has won. Now, all anybody wants to talk about in the media is the threats and the rapes and blah, blah, blah. All of that is basically a smokescreen. It's all nonsense. Most of those claims don't stand up to scrutiny, and the ones that do stand up to scrutiny, there's no evidence that any Gamergate supporter ever sent any of those threats. It's all a load of old nonsense. But it is, once these things establish themselves as media narratives, it's basically impossible to break them. But the actual stated objectives of the movement, if you like, the conditions for success of Gamergate never required anyone to like them. They never required good headlines. Having a good headline was never a winning condition for victory for Gamergate. What they wanted was better standards in games journalism, higher ethics, and they wanted to resist the suggestions of feminists and other far left critics that video games were making the world a worse place. Actually, this is what most of the studies say. The science suggests that these games that people are retreating into is making the world a nicer place, because as young boys get hooked on, the games that do have lots of explosions and boobs and things in them, violent crime in young people goes down. And, there's a study just last week that suggested that, the rise of video games in young people is producing a sort of unprecedented drop, not only in sexual assaults, but in violent assaults, in violent crime, and all sorts of things, because boys are getting it out of their systems. Now, this, like any other sort of male space, and male safe spaces are not very well understood. They're often laughed at. But like any other sort of male space, the kind of core, hardcore video gaming actually has really positive societal benefits. Now, you will never get to hear that in any major newspaper or on any news channel. You will never get to hear that video games are making society a better place. You will never get to hear that, what an important medium they are. All you will ever hear is that there's a bunch of misogynistic trolls on the internet making any woman in the video game, any woman who likes video games, making their life hell. This stuff isn't true, but as I say, I think Gamergate is basically winning in its primary objectives because its primary objectives are unanswerable. They are unarguable. All they're asking for is the bare minimum basic standard of journalistic ethics, and they want to ridicule silly feminists like Anita Sarkeesian who make outlandish claims about video games based on no science and cherry picking available examples. So I think Gamergate basically won. I think that's great. The great tragedy, as we started off this conversation by saying, is that there was no one there really to report on it.
Speaking of which, Milo, I understand, I don't know if it's okay to mention this, but I understand that you're working on a longer form project about Gamergate.
Oh, it's okay. I've been talking about this for ages,
okay,
and people are getting very sick of me telling them it's coming soon. But yes, I am writing a book about this.
Good. Okay.
And it is very, very far in progress and very very close to being in a sort of draft state. But
good for you, because I'm working on one and ain't even close. But good for you.
No, I mean I've just reported just the mere activity of reporting on Gamergate has been such an extraordinarily life-consuming thing. I mean, unlike the feminists, I don't like to whinge about the worst things that happen from readers. But just to give you an example of how this has taken over my life, I've had terrible things through my front door. My email has gone, from 500 to 5,000 emails a day. It's been an extraordinarily transformative, for the most part, a wonderful thing. But it's been quite a drain, and getting a book published under the conditions that I'm currently working under is difficult, but I'm getting there. It will definitely be out by the end of the year. So
great.
People can look out for that.
So keep an eye out for that. Of course, you can go to Breitbart.com and follow what Milo is doing there. And you can be on Twitter at Nero. I mean, I don't need to tell you guys this because I'm sure everybody's following him, but at Nero on Twitter. And you can follow along with everything that Milo's doing. It's not just Gamergate. He's commenting on a broad range of topics, but this is still an important story, still needs to be told, and Milo is still telling it, even if most of the rest of us are not. So the shot across the bow has been recognized, sir, and we certainly appreciate it.
Well, I'm grateful to you for picking it up, and I hope nobody took it too personally out there.
No, of course not.
Out there in the vast, I mean, that is not by any stretch of the imagination the worst thing I've done to conservative media. I think I waded into waters that I did not realise the depth of when I defended the term cuckservative, which we will have to talk about another day.
We'll do that another day. Yeah, we'll do that another day. I wasn't going to bring it up because I
don't think Gamergate is even remotely the worst thing I've done. I'm becoming a pariah even on the right.
Well, we'll bring you back on and talk about the worst stuff you've done later on, Milo. But
I look forward to it.
Me too. It's been such a great time talking with you today. Milo Yiannopoulos, of course, Breitbart.com. Thanks for being with us today, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
We'll let Milo get back to his fried chicken and actually maybe get some sleep tonight. Who knows? I mean, it's like 10:35 in London at the moment. So will there be a video game tie-in to his project? There really should be, right? There should be a video game tie-in to Milo's book. I heard about this a few months ago that Milo was working on the book, and I am looking forward to seeing what he has to say about it, because obviously this is a guy he's the guy who's been covering it. He is the expert on this, and it will be comprehensive. It will be provocative. It'll be a hell of a read. And definitely we're going to have to carve out some time when that book comes out. If not before, when that book comes out, we got to get Milo back on here to discuss the book. So I want to thank Milo for hanging in there this late at night to join us live. I want to thank Linda LeFauve from Davidson College to talk about moral panics. I mean, both kind of similar topics here. Moral panics based on bad data presented in an academic format that turns out to be false and does damage to people's lives. I mean, we're talking about similar issues there. And of course, Andrew Malcolm, Malcolm, at Malcolm on the Twitters, where he is the prince of Twitter. Thanks for being with us today. Don't forget, no show on Thursday because I'll be at Red State Gathering this week. We'll be back again next Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central, 1 on the left coast. Want to thank the folks for being with us today. would be Cranky T-Rex at crankytrex.blogspot.com, buzzpo.com where he does some of his writing, hotair.com where he does some of his writing, and at Cranky T-Rex on the Twitters is thanks for being the chat room guru as always. And thanks for being the guy who linked Milo and I up for this interview. I've written some about Gamergate, but obviously Cranky T-Rex does a lot more and knows a lot more about this culture, which is the reason why I'm always looking to Cranky T-Rex when it comes to this topic, because he is much more well-versed on this than I think most other people besides Milo in the conservative media. So definitely be following Cranky T-Rex, definitely be keeping up with what he's writing about. Monster's with us today, which is always great to have Monster in the chat room. At Sum Ergo Monstro on Twitter, so you can follow him if you're not already doing so. And Steve Eggleston from NoRunnyEggs.com, holding onto the troll gun today, and he will actually be helping us out on Friday. Rather than me doing the analysis of the jobs report, the monthly jobs report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as I normally do, Steve is going to guest blog and take care of that for us on Friday. Steve has got a tremendous amount of insight into these numbers, and you will be very happy that Steve is handling that in my absence. So we're looking forward to that, and maybe Steve will kick in a post or two on other economic indicators. I think there was a pretty good manufacturing report that came out today. So, but I mean, nothing spectacular, but definitely a positive report that came out earlier today. Should be interesting to see what the jobs report does for July. All right, let's go ahead and play a little walking music while we run down the rest of the chat rooms and get my thing here and do the normal Ed Morrissey Show walking music. Try not to make it too loud here so I can be heard over the walking music. All right, I think that's a pretty good level there. Who else has been in the chat room? Don't forget to put your own URLs and Twitter handles up in the chat room. We are all about shameless blogger promotion here at the Ed Morrissey Show. We've got conservative and liberal hands. E. Foreign is back with us. Jeff Dunitz from jeffdunitz.com, at YidWithLid. Great friend of mine and just one of the funniest guys I know on Twitter and in real life as well. Still probably trying to recover from that time we sang happy birthday to him on voicemail. So, yeah, send us the doctor's bills. What can I say? Juanito Cabron, Mr. Fastbucks, both of those guys are fabulous tribbles, of course. Hugh Hewitt Show starts in about 22 minutes. You can tune that in on your AM radio dial or go to the Universe, HUGHNIVERSE.com, the troll-free web surfing experience for Hugh Hewitt fans. Pabo from Finland came the farthest today to see the Ed Morrissey Show. She is our diplomatic representative to the ABBA Museum in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm expecting a diplomatic report at any moment. I have not had enough platform shoes in my life. I need to get some pictures from Pabo on that. All right, so she's got her assignment. Prairie Dog SD via Paso at the Ancestral Morrissey Manse. I'm on. The First Mate, somewhere out there, keeping me on the straight and narrow, and I think my granddaughters are out there too. So that'll be fun. Granddaughter number 1 will be with us next week. The little Admiral will be with us next week. Not so little anymore, guys. She'll be with us next week. Maybe she'll duck in and make a quick appearance on the Ed Morrissey Show on Tuesday. Until then, have yourselves a great weekend, or have yourselves a great week, I should say. If you're going to be at the Red State Gathering, be sure to look me up. If you're not going to be at Red State Gathering, try to follow us for all of the breaking news coming out of there. We're going to be talking to a lot of the Republican candidates. So, like I said, keep your eyes and ears peeled. But until then, have yourselves a great week and don't miss a minute of the Ed Morrissey Show. We'll see ya.